So I'm Brayden. Was working with Mortensen Construction this summer to research kind of late stage design change management workflow. I specifically kind of looked into the ASU Arena project, more specifically the distributed antenna system or DAS scope of work, which is typically a late phase kind of scope that is designed and implemented after many of the other kind of components of the project are either completed or in progress. So this kind of utilizes a lot of information that is existing from the architectural side or trade side that is already installed or being installed in order to coordinate this kind of scope. Contractually speaking, kind of going into the stakeholders, Henderson, our subcontractor and designer for the DAS, was kind of delegated to do this portion of the design. Mortensen dealt primarily with like aggregating, coordinating that model information to make sure that the design kind of worked well with the other kind of scopes of work. And then kind of the architect of record was just there to provide kind of that information initially for the project, and then also kind of as a final approval along with Henderson. But kind of moving into the current state here. So there's kind of two phases of this that I was kind of focusing in on. One being kind of what information and Revit model information was being aggregated in order to reference during the DAS scope design and kind of coordination, which was coming from both the architectural and kind of trade side, and then kind of the DAS scope itself and kind of the design and changes that were being made with that based on certain things. So architecturally, we were talking, so the architect kind of reviews and releases certain information from their BIM 360 kind of cloud system. And then after approval, the general contractor and Mortensen in this case would have to kind of do this manual kind of transfer of information. So that those Revit files that were being referenced later down the line would have to be downloaded and then re-uploaded into this general contractor BIM 360 system. So this was kind of a very manual process that each time any updates to things were brought in, this kind of manual kind of download upload process would have to take place. So that's kind of one of the shared pains here, and then also just kind of having these two systems that are having similar information is another pain point here. So the trade side of things is all within the general contractor BIM 360. So that information is just being created, edited, and reviewed all within BIM 360. So it's much easier to kind of keep the more up-to-date systems. But the BIM manager in this case, as we move into kind of the coordination of the DAS itself, at some point would create a linked Revit model, which links all the architectural Revit information and the existing trade information, the MEP, all that kind of stuff into this kind of central file. They then, the designer from Henderson for the DAS scope would be able to utilize that information to model in the radio boxes, antennas, and kind of cable networks that are included in the DAS scope, which kind of feed the kind of signal for phones and stuff throughout the stadium. So they would add that in to kind of like a linked Revit file or separate file that they created that they would then link into kind of the master linked Revit that Mortensen had. This would, after they complete that, they would send an email saying that they would complete to the integrated construction coordinators at Mortensen, who would then utilize that kind of linked file to copy the information or those model components from that linked file, which is not editable via kind of how the linked files work, into the native Mortensen Revit so that they can edit and kind of do coordination based off of that. And that is another one of kind of the shared pains, is having that information both in this separate linked file, but also in the kind of native Mortensen file. So having these two sources of this very similar information. But that would kind of lead into the Navisworks coordination effort, figuring out if everything fits and and works together nicely, which would then kind of feed down where Mortensen in this case would go ahead and actually make edits and suggestions to the design to better implement the integration of other MEP systems, architectural information, and such, making those changes, which they would then notify via email Henderson again to update their linked file and get ready for approval essentially of those changes. So this is a couple more pain points here, being the communication lag between Henderson and Mortensen because of the use of the kind of emails here, like response times might be slow, it might kind of push off sending the email or et cetera. So it's kind of more of a manual process there. And then the replication of work of modeling and making those changes both in this linked Revit and the native kind of Mortensen Revit was kind of occurring. But as you go up, that would prove they would essentially just double check, Mortensen would double check, and then ask for approval by the designer and the architect, who would then approve, and it would go into shop drawings for install in the field of STAS units. So that's kind of the current state and the pain points moving in, but going to like how might we statement. So how might we better manage late stage design changes within the cloud environment and design authoring tools in ways that clarify and streamline communication between stakeholders and reduce duplicate efforts by separate personas, so that valuable time, energy, and resources can be saved for all involved. So keeping that in mind, moving into kind of the future state. So the biggest thing kind of that changes with the systems is just going from BIM 360 to Autodesk Construction Cloud. And then we'll kind of go from there. So the first thing, addressing those first couple pain points of that manual handoff of architectural information from two systems of record that I kind of found that would address this is a new Autodesk Construction Cloud bridge feature, which is relatively new and hasn't been utilized in very many projects within Mortensen at least, but essentially kind of semi-automates that handoff between stakeholders. So the architect is able to decide which files to share and if they will be automatically updated as changes are made. So that would streamline that process and prevent that cycle of every time there's an update, that manual download, upload kind of process. This also allows for the maintaining of two separate systems within ACC, so that both kind of stakeholders can have their various workflows within those and not worry about interfering within each other's, but still maintains a good enough level of control for each stakeholder in which documents are shared and how they're shared. But beyond that, the trade information and such, and the linking of those kind of already existing informational models stays the same, but kind of leads into the second shared gain, which affects the DAS scope more specifically. So I'll kind of explain the shared gain and then go how it affects the process. So essentially, I'm saying that Revit work sets management improvements would be a good thing. So this kind of includes a few things. The first being very similar to how in Autodesk Construction Cloud, you can have roles and kind of management permissions between files and folder structure. This would be very similar, except in the Revit environment with work sets, which currently allow you to divvy up work between different people without interfering with each other's whatever you're working on. This currently is kind of an owner-borrower system. So it allows an owner to have it, and then if you request borrowing permissions, they get a ping and be able to approve it. But or just having multiple people kind of having owners on different work sets. However, this update will be more like a role-based system, so that there could be a DAS designer work set per se for the DAS system that would have permissions and be native to kind of the central Revit file. and allow for that information to be editable, but still view the other information without the risk of interference in model stuff that the designer is not supposed to kind of interfere with. This would also include kind of an automated Procore-esque ball and court system for notification. So it automate that notification process when work is complete, so that those emails, those tedious emails, don't have to continue to be kind of the primary mode of contact for notifying when work is complete within Revit, and that coordination can continue to go. So how this affects this, so essentially that DAS Revit file that the subcontractor Henderson created originally would become a work set kind of managed under the new organizational principles. And then once they're completed with their work, an automatic notification would be sent to the general contractor, which then in this case, they would no longer have to do that kind of copying of data from the linked file into the native, because it would already be built in there. And so then they can go straight into coordination within Navisworks. That can be notified to the integrated construction coordinator again to make kind of the suggested changes. But those changes now no longer need to be referenced back and changed within the linked file by Henderson, because it is all within the same kind of file ecosystem, I guess, within Revit. Then that notification can once again be sent kind of automatically through that to the designer to approve again, and then export to the shop drawings for install. So kind of having just more integrated approach within the Revit file, so there's less kind of cross work between files and external communication systems. But that is kind of what I have. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that was able to help me out from Mortensen, and then also Nathan and Bluebeam and everyone else that's here today spending their time listening. So with that, that is what I got. So thank you. I'm open to questions.
Great job, Brayden. Thank you. Round of applause. I will say I liked your comment about the ball and court. I think Procore did start that early on, and I know ACC has adopted that, but I don't think we've really adopted it necessarily in the BIM issues world. So that's a cool. I hadn't really thought about that idea. So kudos for that. And any other thoughts from our group? We'll spend a minute here and provide thoughts before we get into Benjamin as our last presentation. Jared, I know you have something to say.
No, I like it. I was thinking as he was going, it's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be ACC. There's other solutions that can do similar things, but I was thinking that it was a huge feature gap for us, and we implemented Bridge. So I love to hear that. I'm less well versed on our design tools, and this is an interesting and elegant workflow that seems like it would work to me. But I'd be curious, is there any preliminary feedback here that feels like this is an elegant solution that would work beautifully? But so the shared gain on the construction management platform side, I can certainly appreciate. I'm less certain that this would be accepted, the Revit sort of model coordination side of things, but seems elegant thus far. Any resistance, Brayden, to what you've proposed here?
We haven't been able to implement it necessarily, but based on the people I've talked to, kind of the communication point of that with those automatic notifications, the ball and court was a big thing that would address the biggest pain point that was kind of told to me and that was just that communication and the emails kind of going back and forth. So people were pretty open to that, but the work set kind of management thing, we haven't really gone to trial, so it would be kind of a trial to see how that works with separate stakeholders kind of all working within a singular file versus kind of the more common, at least what I've seen, being a linked file into a kind of a more central file. So then you kind of segment it off that way versus segmenting it off within a singular kind of live file. So
yeah. Yeah,
I'll be
I'm
real
curious to see where it
interested.
goes.
I'll be real interested in seeing what kind of efficiencies and adoption you get with that ACC bridge. That looked like a pretty interesting component in your future state here.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Good find.